Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Please be seated. When Nicole and I got married, one of our friends gave us a lilac bush. It was one of those from the nursery in its nice black plastic pot, a few feet tall. It was an incredibly thoughtful gift. This bush, this living thing that would grow alongside us, that we could plant, and every time we saw it and smelled its flowers, the wafting scent of lilacs in the air, we would be reminded of that day, of our wedding, of our growing marriage and relationship, that we would see this plant grow as the depth of our connection also grew. It was a beautiful symbol, a beautiful idea. The practicality of it, though, was something else. At this point, we were living in a rented apartment in Portsmouth, somewhere that we didn't see ourselves being long-term, that was just sort of a temporary place that didn't really have garden space. It wasn't somewhere where we wanted to plant the symbol of our eternal union. And so it stayed in its pot. We set it there on a wide beam that lined one of the garden beds that was there at the place. And for 3 years, it stayed outside in that pot. Through summers during which I forgot to water it as much as it probably needed. During winters where the frost was so harsh that I was certain it was going to kill the roots. It stayed in that pot, pushing against the plastic sides of its container. It languished. It would drop its leaves before anything else around it. At the end of each winter, I would see some buds gathered, worried about that they would never, in fact, open up to reveal new leaves. This plant was struggling. It was far from thriving. And there it remained until things changed for us and for that plant. We moved. We got new jobs, we moved to a new house, a new town. We were finally somewhere where we felt like we could put down roots. And so one of the first things that we did after moving to Durham is that we went out into one of the garden beds in front of the rectory. We dug a hole wide and deep enough to fit that plant. We lined it with compost. And we began to cut away the plastic container, because by that point, it had far outgrown the chance of just easily getting the root ball out. As we cut away the black plastic from around this lilac, what it revealed was a plant that had become, in gardening parlance, root-bound. Which is whenever a plant has outgrown the container when it's in, when it is being limited by its ability to reach and access nutrients and water that it needs for its survival and for its thriving. What we found when we removed that black pot was a plant that was this tangled mass of roots, intertwined with one another, that had far outgrown the space and the constraints that they had been given. And so we took this root-bound lilac and put it in the ground. We put more compost over top of it, put the soil over it, patted it down, and watered it in. Uncertain of what its future would be, whether it was too far gone, or whether it could, in fact, make a home in this new place. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." In our gospel today, we hear the story of the raising of Lazarus. It's another in a series of these long stories that we hear only from John's gospel. These stories that are what John refers to as signs. These signs that point towards Jesus, who he is, who God has sent him to the earth to be, and through him who God is. They are signs of what God is doing in the midst of the people of Israel at that time, what God has sought to reveal to the world, the light that has come into the world, the Messiah, the one who has come to set his people free. This reading today comes at a time where tensions between Jesus and the temple authorities are ratcheting up, where they're reaching a boiling point. In the midst of all of this, Jesus gets word that his friend Lazarus has taken ill. But Jesus doesn't act surprised by it. And the disciples who are ready for him to do something, to act immediately. But Jesus pauses. He takes 2 days to think about it. He tells them to do not worry. This illness does not lead to death, but is for the glorification of God. Almost the same words that we heard him say about the blindness of the man born blind last week. And then finally, after these 2 days pass, Jesus tells the disciples, it's time to go to Judea. And then they've got a whole other set of worries and concerns. You're going to go there. What if they stone you? Where you were just there and people really didn't like that, so maybe we should stay away. Jesus says, no. This is where we need to be. Lazarus has fallen asleep. Our friend is dead. We need to go that he might live again. And so they set out for Bethany, the village of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and they meet Martha along the way. And her first reaction on seeing Jesus is one of maybe frustration or anger or just despondency of a sister in grief. Lord, if only you had been here, our brother would not have died. Our brother would not have died. And Jesus says, do not worry, he will live again. And then Martha gives the sort of by-the-book response. Yes, 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 I know that he will live again at the resurrection in the last day. Jesus says, no, that's not what this is about. Can't you see it? What I have come here to do, what God is seeking to show you. The resurrection is not something out there. It's not something we have to wait till the last day for. Life is not some gift waiting sometime off in the future. I am the resurrection, and I am the life. They are here. They are now. I am he. God desires that you might live now. God's gift of life is not for some time later. It is for right now. And finally, Jesus calls Mary to him and sees her weeping, sees the mourners there with her, and he is deeply moved by it to the point of even weeping himself. He knows the end. He knows that Lazarus will live again, and yet he shares in their grief, shares in their sadness, shares in their desire to see this brother of theirs live again. And so Jesus makes his way to the tomb where he tells them to roll the stone away. And he calls out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus emerges from that tomb draped in the funeral garb, draped in the strips of linen meant to preserve the body. His hands are bound, his feet are bound, his face is covered like some reinvigorated mummy. He comes out of that tomb. And gazing upon his friend, Jesus calls out to the crowd gathered, unbind him and let him go. It is this unbinding of Lazarus that is the culmination of this story. Jesus just doesn't just leave it at calling Lazarus out of the tomb. Because Lazarus isn't being called out to the same old life that he had lived before. Jesus is calling him to new life, to live not just again, but to live anew. And to do that requires unbinding. It requires the release of the constraints around his hands and around his feet. It requires letting go of these old assumptions of how things are and how things ought to be. It means letting go of the constraints of the old life to accept the new, to accept that Jesus is the resurrection and is the life, that through Jesus, God is breathing God's gift of life to God's people. If only they will accept it, if only they will let themselves be unbound. A couple of years after graduating college at Sewanee, this little liberal arts school in the middle of Tennessee, I found myself back there, working for the university in this sort of in-between time of life, trying to figure out what came next. And during that period, I was invited, or I went to an event on campus that was hosted by the university's Women's Center. And it was an event in which they invited 7 gay men, out and open gay men who were students and recent alumni and staff, folks with a university connection, to sit around a circle together and to talk about their experience of being gay at Sewanee. Each of them, to a person, shared stories of what it was like to live denying part of themselves. The experience of coming to this university and feeling like there was something that they could not share with their friends, with their peers, with their fraternity brothers, with the people closest to them, with anyone else. And the way that they felt bound by that experience, bound by the culture that they were a part of, bound by the norms of this place, by the unspoken prejudices of it, and the sometimes spoken prejudices of it. And each of them shared their stories of what it took to allow them to come out, what allowed them to live as who they knew they were, to be open about their sexuality, their identity, to be open with themselves, with one another, with the community as a whole. It took the courage to challenge those norms and assumptions of the place. A courage to believe that it was better to live in the light, to live in honesty and openness rather than to deny something about themselves. What they described was an experience of being unbound. Unbound by the culture and the norms of the place, unbound by the prejudices of others, unbound by their own fear of how their peers might react. It was a powerful thing to witness, to hear, to be invited into that space and to hear their reflections. And for me, standing on the outside of the circle, it made me reflect on my own place in that culture that I had perpetuated and been a part of as a student, the norms and assumptions that I had failed to challenge, the prejudices that maybe I still myself held on to, or that were still with me. And somehow, in the midst of this conversation, I too found myself unbound. Unbound to accept these peers, these friends, these folks who I had known, some for a long time, some whose stories I was hearing for the first time. Around that circle and in that space, I heard the stories of people who had experienced themselves as being unbound, free to be who God had created them to be, to live the lives that God had called them to. I think all of us can relate to that experience of feeling bound. Like that lilac bush sitting in its plastic pot, pushing against the sides that would not budge. Maybe it's grief that binds you. Grief over a loss of a spouse who has died, or a child, or a sibling, or a parent. Grief over a friend who departed this earth too soon. Or maybe it's some shame or guilt that you carry with you for something that you've done or something that you have failed to done. The shame and guilt over some secret that you feel like you can't share with anyone, that just sits within you, constraining you, binding you like Lazarus's grave cloths around his wrists. Maybe what binds you is a set of cultural norms or expectations that have pushed you along in your lives to fill roles that never quite fit for you. I think of what Richard shared with us earlier about the Reverend Polly Murray, someone who experienced herself being bound by gender expectations, by racial expectations, by the expectations of what a black woman's life should look like in the early 20th century, and who herself struggled to become unbound over the course of her life. So many of us carry with us that experience of feeling bound. But what our gospel offers us today is the hope that, like Lazarus having those grave cloths removed from his wrist and his feet and his face, that we too might be unbound. That through Jesus Christ, who is the resurrection and the life, that God might also give us that gift of life. That God might breathe into us the courage to open up, to let go of that shame that we carry with us or the grief that binds us, to the courage to fight against the norms and expectations that constrain us, to struggle against evil and sin in this world wherever we encounter it. And God might give us the faith and the courage to be who God has created us to be, to live full lives in the light of God, to be fully ourselves, not in our relationship with others, to love ourselves as God loves us, as we seek to love our neighbors too. Jesus makes it clear in this gospel what he came to do: to unbind us, to call us out of our graves into new life, to liberate us from our fears, our anxieties, our shame, our guilt, so that we might live in the light of God and be fully ourselves, fully present to one another, to be so that God's light might fully shine in and through us. For the first couple of years after we planted it, that lilac bush didn't do much. It still put out its kind of scraggly leaves, a couple of new branches here and there, but it still very much seemed like the same root-bound plant that we had put into the soil. Then around the third year, as winter was nearing at its end, I noticed something new. More buds on it than I had ever seen before. Out of the weathered gray bark of that original trunk, new green-hued branches sprung forth. And then as spring came, as April turned into May, I noticed new little stalks coming up, flower stalks. These terminals of clusters of pale pink flowers. 8, 10, 12 of them sprang forth, filling the space in front of our house with their sweet aroma. Every time we stepped outside, we could smell those lilac blossoms. We would walk by them and see them and admire them. Short-lived as the flowers are, they contain this potency and power in and of themselves to fill the whole area, the whole space, to make their presence known. Season after season, that lilac continues to put forth its flowers. It continues to grow and to thrive in that space. Clearly, those roots that were so bound up and twisted and matted with one another have found their way to deeper soil. They're being nourished by what is beneath them, drawing up water and nutrients from the earth. In short, that lilac has become unbound. Amen.